Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you kindly for stopping by. It's appreciated. I thank Brian Kurab for giving me the photograph of Dr. Richard Sesibera and myself when I was introducing him on Saturday, and it took me back to that comment he made about how the African Union wasn't able to land its plane when it was seeking to negotiate a settlement in Libya at the time of Gaddafi. And I'll talk about the EU-Africa situation right now, momentarily. Home thoughts. Nairobi is very seasonal. The weather, and we're now all set to enter the cold period, which was described so beautifully by Karen Blixen in Out of Africa. The early morning air of the African highlands is of such a tangible coldness and freshness that time after time the same fancy there comes back to you. You are not on earth, but in dark, deep waters, going ahead along the bottom of the sea. It is not even certain that you are moving at all, the flows of chilliness against your face may be the deep sea currents, and your car, like some sluggish electric fish, may be sitting steadily upon the bottom of the sea, staring in front of her with the glaring eyes of her lamps and letting the submarine life pass by here. The stars are so large because they are not real stars, but reflections, shimmering upon the surface of the water. Alongside your path, on the sea bottom, live things darker than their surroundings keep on appearing, jumping up and sweeping into the long grass as crabs and beach fleas will make their way into the sand. The lights get clearer, and about sunrise the sea bottom lifts itself towards the surface, a new created island. Worlds of smells drift quickly past you, fresh, rank smells of the olive bushes, the brine scent of burnt grass, a sudden quelling smell of decay. And then there is that intensely hot period just before the rains come, which makes me remember Spinal Tap, and it's as if someone is turning the knob up to 11. I'll put up that link for Spinal Tap, that very scene. Then, of course, in Nairobi there is a monthly traffic cycle which is correlated to payday. The moment everyone gets paid at the end of the month, the roads suddenly teem as everyone fills their vehicles, gets on the road. And suddenly it's taking an hour where it took 30 minutes, with serious tail risks of complete 3-hour plus type debacles. Then as the month moves forward, the roads start to thin out. Just before payday, you can fly around this city. Political reflections that President Zuma has withdrawn from the EU-Africa Summit, confirmed his withdrawal from this week's EU-Africa Summit in Brussels, accusing the EU of treating Africans as subjects and wanting to decide who from Africa should be allowed to attend. I think that time must pass where we are looked on as subjects. We are told who must come, who must not come. It is wrong and causes this unnecessary unpleasantness, he said on Sunday. I thought the AU and the EU are equal organizations representing two continents, but there is not a single one of them who must decide for others. The Department of International Relations and Cooperation said on Sunday that Mr. Zuma would not participate in the April 2nd, April 3rd summit, and this is following on from the news that Bashir, of course, was never going to attend, but interestingly, his Ministry of Foreign Affairs said until today, March 30, President Bashir has not received an invitation to the summit, and really it was they who started this sort of pushback against the EU, saying the invitation of this summit to the African leaders was selective, and in doing this the European Union is trying to divide the African Union. So of course President Mugabe is not going because of Grace Mugabe. Now Jacob Zuma's not going, but I think others have already arrived. interesting. It's very interesting how Europe, and I think in part it's ICC correlated, um, how Africa is now becoming more assertive with Europe. The last sign-off heard by air traffic control in Kuala Lumpur was "Good night Malaysian 370," not "All right, good night," as previously reported. And people are saying that informs us that it might not have been, that the previous language was more sinister in a way. The Boeing 777, of course, was just leaving Malaysian-controlled airspace when the final words were heard. We would like to confirm that the last conversation in the transcript between the air traffic controller and the cockpit is at 1:19 Malaysian time and is "Good night Malaysian 370." I'll put up a photograph of the shadow of a New Zealand Air Force P-3 Orion aircraft seen on low cloud cover while it searches for the missing airline MH370. I wrote that piece, Geopolitical Musings, over the weekend, and I'm just going to quote the first paragraph. Don DeLillo, in his book Cosmopolis, says, "Everything is barely weeks, everything is days, we have minutes to live, and certainly the 21st century is a world hurtling at a dizzying velocity." Asia Times got an interesting article saying, the Pentagon's full spectrum dominance doctrine implies the encirclement of China by NATO, coupled with the pivot style encirclement of China. I, for one, think you can't have, in this new multipolarity, more diffuse world, where the US, of course, remains head and shoulders above everybody else in terms of the power it can project, but nevertheless it's going to be increasingly difficult for one to go against two, and that's why I thought that the move on the Ukraine was really unnecessary at this moment, especially when one thought the US was concentrating on its pivot to Asia. Currency markets: Euro 137.76, dollar index 80.11. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen said the world's biggest economy will need stimulus for some time. That was taken as rowing back from the previous position where she was saying that 6 months before the first rate hike. Japanese yen 103.26, been soft of late. Swissy 0.8846, pound 166.62. These higher beta currencies like the pound been stronger of late. Aussie 0.9260, traded as high as 93.04, which was the highest since November 21st, before trading little changed. Indian rupee 60.125, having tested the 60 level yesterday. South Korean won 10.5984, the Rial 227.22. The Egyptian pound 696.60, and the rand 10.5948. You've got to keep an eye on the rand. That might well just slice through resistance around here at 10.50 and go straight to 10. The dollar has fallen 0.8% in the past 3 months. Euro down 0.7%. Yen has gained 1.2%. The Aussie has surged 3.9%, and an interesting decoupling from China. Dollar index 80.11 last. Yellen signaled that while the Fed will continue tapering, they're not in a hurry to raise rates, and that was seen by the market as dovish, and that's correct. She talked it down, but interestingly, not by that much. But on the other side, have sterling, rupee, rand. These are all quite vigorous and strong against the dollar of late. Euro dollar 137.76 last. Interestingly, it bounced after the Eurozone reported inflation hit its lowest level since November 2009 in March. Annual consumer inflation was 0.5% in March. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. That's a little bit softer. 104, 105, good place to buy the yen. I think the Tankan was considered weak. The S&P Agriculture Index of 8 commodities climbed 6% since the start of March. But an annual advance of 2.7%. Combined net bullish positions across 11 agricultural products climbed more than 5-fold in the first quarter. Wheat holdings are the most bullish in 16 months. Wheat is poised for the biggest quarterly gain since September 2012. We know why. Ukraine, cold, dry weather. Fields in Germany had 49% less rainfall than average. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Gold 1284.43, now more than $100 below its 2014 high. You'll remember being a bear even during what was quite a strong rally. Crude oil 101.37. I think it's a big sell above 100. I think actually its equilibrium price right now is nearer $75. Interesting report by a company called COFES, which announced 10 new emerging economies it has identified into 2 separate groups. The first comprises Peru, the Philippines, Indonesia, Colombia, and Sri Lanka, which it named the PPICs. They had strong potential confirmed by a sound business environment. The second group comprises Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia. These countries are marked by very difficult or extremely difficult business environments which could hamper their growth prospects. However, the head of country risk at COFES, Julian Massi, said that in 2001 the quality of governance in Brazil, China, India, and Russia was comparable to that of Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia today. Interesting point. And then a lot of interesting data. Well worth having a look at, actually. It's on Rich Wrap-Ups. East Africa's new great oil game is a report, an Africa report. A very interesting report. The eruption of fighting in South Sudan brought East Africa's political crises into sharp focus at a time of optimism about the region's economic takeoff. Undaunted analysts point to fast improving transport links and new oil and gas discoveries. 4 leaders dominate the East African diplomatic chessboard, its diplomacy, its soldiering, and its business interests. New railways, road networks, together with new pipelines, electric power grids, forging political alliances that will allow them to reshape the region. At international gatherings such as the AU summit in Addis Ababa, the 4 gravitate towards each other. Ethiopia's Haile Mariam Desalegn, Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta, Rwanda's Paul Kagame, and Uganda's Yoweri Museveni. We have refused to be a proxy for foreign powers. It's a major shift in our regional diplomatic orientation. Differing in age and political experience, they argue about many details, but there is a critical point of consensus. If East Africa is to grasp the economic opportunities now available, there must be a determined effort to integrate its markets and economies, even if that means making concessions and compromises in the short term. All 4 run interventionist foreign policies. Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda sent troops into Somalia, with Rwandan and Ugandan troops have both been invited to and expelled from the DRC. Favour a statist hand on the economic tiller, but they are all building up business classes on whose political loyalty they can rely. Economic growth and breaking away from dependence on Western markets are common imperatives, saying none of them really enthuse about democracy. Their shared political credo is a kind of pragmatic authoritarianism, good way of putting it. Like China's Deng Xiaoping, they do not care whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Above all, these leaders' solidarity is informed by a common economic interest. Gabriel Nigatu, Regional Director of the African Development Bank, points out East Africa is the most promising regional bloc. It has registered between 5 and 6% growth annually for the past decade. We estimate that regional gross domestic product will expand 18-fold by the middle of the century, from 185 billion in 2010 to 3.5 trillion by 2050. This area is comparable to the period immediately after independence. Economic promise is based on the depth and scale of integration, says Nigatu. If Ethiopia is drawn into the EAC, there could be a single market of more than 200 million people. Regional competition and transport links are incentives. Talking about Uganda discovering oil in Bunyoro in 2006, production being delayed by disputes with oil companies over the size of a planned local refinery and pipeline routes. Kenya's discovery of oil in Turkana in 2010. Uganda signing an agreement worth more than $8 billion with China National Offshore Oil Company, Francis Total, and Ireland's Tullow to build a refinery at Lake Albert. Assuming the reform agenda progresses, a moderate level of customs harmonization and deepening of regional trade integration, this would have a tremendous effect on regional growth. Talking about the 2 mammoth railway projects due for completion. Dar es Salaam, Isaka, Kigali, Mombasa, Nairobi, Kigali, and saying, look, even if you had 4, 5, 6 World Banks, there is no way they would have sunk this kind of capital to individual projects in one region. There is not a bank or an international bond issue that would commit these kinds of resources to single issue projects. It is just too risky. Talking about the political economy, saying that's another matter. Not only the rate of growth matters, but also the quality. Governments need to ensure that it is shared across the board. That's a fact and a concern. The trouble in East Africa is that the speed of change is overwhelming the capacity of the industrial and service sectors to provide the jobs and alternative livelihood opportunities. A formal wage-paying job is a privilege for a tiny minority of East Africa, just 1.6% of Uganda, 4% of Burundi, 5% of Tanzania, and 6% of Kenya. Working populations are formally employed. Saying shanty towns are expanding inexorably. Governments tempted to ignore the new underclass. South Sudan serves as a cautionary tale. People say that South Sudan is a failed state. I disagree. South Sudan is a state that never was, says Mabio Garang de Mabio, son of John Garang. The first Republic of South Sudan is dead. We should now begin considering how to constitute the Second Republic. Saying that, President Museveni mounted a robust defense of the role of Uganda's troops, but everyone's worrying if violence continues and escalates. We don't want proxy militias acting on behalf of individual countries. That's our main fear at the moment. And clearly, I think geopolitically, it's become a lot hotter. The asymmetric risks, not least the Eastleigh bomb, Likoni bomb, Westgate. That has turned worse. That Maplecroft report, which saw Sudan as extremely risky, more risky than it's been in the last 12 months, and I agree with that. Somalia. But, somehow or other you've got this very powerful bullish story, and it's going to have to work its way through all of this, I'm afraid. Moving on, I remain of the view as I was on the 19th of August 2013 and before, when I said, the eastern seaboard of Africa, from Mozambique through Somalia, is the last great energy prize in the 21st century. I'll put up a photograph of the Indian Ocean taken from southern palms, and that speaks to my point about the new importance of the Indian Ocean, because a lot of this oil and gas is destined for Asia. And I think the Americans would like to control that, have a gatekeeper status, so that makes it an interesting geopolitical development. Bob Diamond-backed investment company Atlas Mara said it would acquire Sub-Saharan African bank ABC Holdings Limited and ADC African Development Corporation AG for up to $265 million in cash and shares. South Africa posted its third trade surplus in 4 months in February as a weaker rand stoked exports and curtailed imports. Trade balance switched to a surplus of 1.72 billion rand, compared with a deficit of 17.1 billion rand in January. South Africa President Zuma says he didn't request an upgrade to his private residence and asked why he should pay for it. They did this without telling me. Why should I pay for something I did not ask for, he said. South African oil share hit a new record yesterday. It is up 4.32% in 2014. Dollar rand. I'll put up a 3-month chart and you can see this could rally quite sharply to 10 on the charts. That's what it's looking like. Egyptian pound 696.54 where we've been. The Egyptian stock market has now fallen 8.1937% since the 25th of March. It remains up 15.87% so far this year. The Nigerian oil share down 5.15%. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 11.36% in 2014, but all your returns have been eroded by a free-falling cedi. Eni has hired Bank of America to advise on the sale of a stake of about 15% in the Mozambique gas field that could raise up to $5 billion. Several sources familiar with the matter said oil and gas firms need partners to share the huge investment required to develop the large Mozambique project. It sold 20% of its Mozambican offshore gas acreage to China's CNPC last year in a deal worth around $4.2 billion. Bankers see China's CONOC as the most likely buyer because it is keen to build up a liquefied natural gas business. I'll put up a photograph of Maputo seen from the sea. 2 comments: the African continent accounts for only 2% of global GDP, yet it accounts for 10% of global cybercrime incidents. Apparently, the global rate of software piracy stands at around 42% in Africa. It is closer to 80% according to the Business Software Alliance. The highest rate of piracy is in Zimbabwe, where 92% of software is being used illegally. The ICC ruled on President Uhuru Kenyatta, and they basically created an adjournment of approximately 6 months, but have issued quite a strong notice. The Chamber reiterates its view that it is now incumbent on the Kenyan government to take the necessary actions through relevant office and essentially put them on a 2-week report card. Monday's Eastleigh attack also follows the one that took place in Mombasa a fortnight ago, in which 6 people were killed and scores injured after gunmen opened fire at worshippers at a church in Likoni. 6 people were killed last night, dozens injured. This is in the Somali area of Nairobi, Eastleigh. The attacks occurred at the Sheraton Cafe in the New Kwa Muzaira Super Grill Centre along Eastleigh's 11th Street at around 7:30 p.m. According to the owner of the Sheraton Cafe, Mr. Patrick Kikuyu, people were watching the evening news when he heard 2 explosions, followed by complete darkness. He said he tried to flee from the scene, discovered that the door had been locked from the outside. When I finally managed to get outside, I saw 6 bodies, he said. Remember, a Toyota truck seized in Mombasa with 6 bombs, which, by the way, was left parked in the car park at the police station for a number of days with its detonator inside. It is believed to be one of 3 dirty bomb vehicles. Both Kenyan and FBI agents are racing against time to locate and disable the bomb vehicles. Kenya last Tuesday restricted all refugees to 2 camps after a weekend attack on a church in Mombasa. The Australian government has issued a travel advisory warning its citizens of possible terrorist attacks in Kenya, in Nairobi and Mombasa. So really, the frequency and intensity of these types of things have spiked. As I have stated previously, asymmetric risks remain potent and continue to gain potency. I'll put up a photograph taken by Sony Metu of a picture of a scene outside the Sheraton Hotel in Nairobi last night. I'll put up a photograph of Westgate that I took 189 days ago. Kenya police car bombers linked to mall plotters. This is a report in AP. A Kenyan police official says 2 men arrested with a car bomb on Kenya's coast nearly 3 weeks ago were in contact with plotters of the September terrorist attack on a Nairobi mall that killed at least 67 people. The official, who spoke on condition of anonymity because he is not authorized to speak with the media, said Monday the vehicle targeting a shopping mall in Mombasa was packed with 173 kilograms of explosives. The official said the 2 men arrested March 11 had spoken on the phone with militants in Somalia connected to the Westgate Mall attacks. I went to listen to Pradeep Panrana's earnings release where ARM Cement reported revenue up 24%, full year revenue, full year profit before tax up 12%, full year profit after tax up 8%, earnings per share up 9.1633%, the dividend was hiked 20%. Company commentary: despite some weakness in Kenya's construction sector during 2013, cement sales increased 31%. The cement division is worth 86% of group turnover. The big plant in Dar es Salaam was using imported clinker. Profit margins are expected to increase materially after the Tanga clinker plant becomes operational in the second half of the year. Bit of compression, margin compression. Expect margin expansion when the Tanga clinker plant becomes operational. Significant capacity expansion in play. And the share, interestingly, exhibits very low beta. And I told Pradeep once, and he said, "Can you please say that for the camera?" He's done a small documentary, and I'm mentioning that fact. I'll put up a photograph of him at the Capital Club yesterday evening. Transcentury sells stake in Rift Valley Railways to Citadel Capital subsidiary Africa Railways. The Africa Railways has acquired an additional 34% stake in the national rail operator of Kenya and Uganda. and Transcentury reported a first half acceleration of 16.725% in profit after tax. Interesting report in Business Daily about the total take home for UK Inc., saying it represented, this is the dividend payments from the Nairobi Securities Exchange, it represented more than half, or 55.1% of the entire 34.8 billion shillings of dividends paid by the 15 big British companies with listed at the stock exchange with a big British component. Vodafone raked in 7.3 billion shillings in dividends, M-Pesa royalty fees, Diageo, Standard Chartered, Barclays, BAT, Helios, and I wrote about this, Well, first point I want to make, if one of your criteria is dividend payments, then you're doing very well to invest in these companies, which have a majority or close to majority UK Inc. stake, because those companies want to receive the dividends, so you just sort of sit in the slipstream. I wrote about this on the 25th of March, how the ties that bind Kenya and the United Kingdom are deep, and you see it particularly at the stock market. If you want to inspect any share, look at that link on Rich Wrap-Ups where you can check out any share. The Kenya shilling a little bit firmer at 86.35, but we've been around this place for quite a while. The Nairobi All Shares has rallied 5.298% in 2014 and is less than 1% of a record high from the 26th of March. The NAC 20 is up 2.15% so far in 2014. Once again, I'm deeply grateful that you took the time to stop by, and if you've listened to it all for all these minutes, then I'm even more grateful for your kindness.